Thank you very much, Cindy. And I appreciate everybody coming here this morning and basically getting an update on what we're trying to do here. What I'd like to do here is, in our agenda here, is basically go over the results of the survey we put out on this topic and basically give you an update on where we're at. And then we've asked a panel here who are prominent in PMAC and also in their industry, and we tried to get a wide range of industry exposure to basically how does this potential certification process and turnarounds, outages, and shutdowns benefit PMAC, the industry, and potentially individuals like yourselves. Again, very kind words that Cindy had mentioned. I've been involved with this. I'm basically right now in a consulting role, supporting other companies in other industries of improving their outages and maintenances. But this all started with Ron Bettin and myself getting together. And actually it was basically back about 2 years ago at the PMAC conference in 22, we started talking about, okay, what are the needs in the industry? And we basically came up with, there's a gap. And PMAC has a very good program in asset management professional certification, maintenance managed professional, and we thought there needs to be a third pillar to that. I've also asked some distinguished panelists here, Sean Berbericki, who is the Director of Terminals and Capital at Canpotex, Kurt Esser, who is also presenter here did the presentation yesterday on turnarounds and project management. He's a Managing Director at Cursor, Inc., and then Vince Okuji, who's a Superintendent at Reliability-Based Metals, and I'll basically ask them just, okay, what is the insight? But then at the end, I'd like to open the questions up to yourselves and ask whether this is something beneficial to you. So a brief history, we started back in 22, 23 to start putting up, putting together a justification why PMAC should take this on as a project, Ron and I. And then we did get approval by the PMAC board here to basically go out with a survey within PMAC and survey the members in the first quarter of this year and basically get input and feedback from the members about whether their belief is that this is beneficial to develop a certification program in this area. Again, what I want to do is share the findings and the visions of what came out of this, talk about the extent and the scale, and what we found was the impact on industry and currently in this area around turnaround outages and shutdown management. What's the landscape of training out there and what's available currently? And then what are really the needs that drives this to justify going ahead with this? Bottom line here is that there's a cost-benefit analysis that we've done, a support and outline around how this initiative could be taken. So we're really now on to the next step to getting final approval from the board to proceed with this, but this is an opportunity to get basically getting feedback from individuals like yourselves and seeing if there's anything missing or do we have the necessary support. And in the panel discussion, we'll just basically ask some questions here associated with that. But quickly, just to begin with, in making sure that, why is certification important? And when we put out the survey, we asked members across the country. We had 129 respondents. So actually a very good return on the questions. And basically give back our feedback. And on average, people were basically saying is their outages are about 42 million and often exceed budgets and schedule. And again, it's a big impact in our industries. It doesn't matter, and we've got the whole range of industries, across the country. It's not just focused on oil and gas, and then Ron and I are particularly in that area, but looking in the mining, pulp and paper, manufacturing, it's a big effect of it. But if you could improve on that, there's a prize of 17 million. And here you can see the breakdown by industries in terms of the feedback we had. So just about every industry has some opportunities to improve. Again, we asked the question around what could help and could a certification process, and I'm going to use the term, provide professionalism to our industry in an area similar to what PMAC has provided in the asset management area and the maintenance professional. And again, then align here with, the reality is there's two aspects here. We're all experiencing shortage of personnel and skills. And if you're a client and you're hiring experienced people, how do you know what that certification is? Or how do you know that person is? And when we ask the company in terms of, basically where does, when we ask the survey or we ask people, where did they get the experience? Predominantly, the joke I use is you did something wrong at work and you got thrown into outages. And you learned it by the seat of your pants. There was some maybe internal training, and then maybe some people have taken project management. But the reality is we basically learn by osmosis. And is that the right way for what we truly have as a profession to develop and maintain that skill set? But at the same time, think about and don't know everybody's industry, but a lot of turnaround professionals or outage professionals, they tend to be freelancers. And they're out there. So what can we provide them to show that they truly have attained a certain level of skill sets that you, as potential employers, know that you're getting the value that we need? So we got great feedback on that, and I'll go through a little more on that. But then, we've gotten a bunch of people who said we would be interested in helping. And we've got initially 8 people on our steering committee, and there's more around this room who've interested and appreciate the insight. But anybody else is interested in this effort, we would love the help. But we basically looked at this, creating this governance board, and to help us oversee the strategy and the development of this certification. And again, creating a curriculum that meets the broad cross-section of what PMAC covers. It's not just for oil and gas. It's basically the entire breadth. And think of it as what we want to do is develop and identify the principles. The intensity of how you manage these things is really dependent on yourselves as clients or your industries. Again, looking at strategic guidance from that committee, curriculum development, and how do we do stakeholder management, but at the same time, looking for, as we develop this program, is there fundings from industry? Is there basically a pent-up frustration in our organization as PMAC, but others where they can grab on enrollment? And at the same time, what does other competition potentially out there that could be? Again, and the final aspect is to make sure that if we do provide a program, that we ensure quality assurance and continuous improvement. And again, the general feeling from the survey indicated that most people in that survey, and again, it's probably a little bit biased because they were first off responding to the survey, but people said that this is a need that they see and they agree with. Again, the course structure, very similar to what were the other 2 programs that PMAC has, a series of modules. These are just proposed, where they're not finalized, but basically outlining, so what is a turnaround or shutdown or outage management? Okay, how do you set up the event, the strategic aspect and the scope for those events? What are those planning and scheduling aspects you have to take in consideration? Particular, and again, a lot of discussion in these meetings we've had is around, the health, safety, and environmental considerations. Cost and estimating, who loves that part of it? Who's doing that really well? Okay, even more reasons for it. But again, the other one is, we don't do all these events on our own. We have to bring in partners, contractors, supply management chains, and how do we go about doing that? And then finally, the actual fun part, which is the execution of the event and the post-activity associated. And then we would tie it up with a post-event lessons learned. An interesting thing, and again, where I do a lot of support in industry now, is helping organizations capture those learnings, but actually apply learnings like that, because they tend to be one and done. They put them on the shelf, they come back, and then nobody really applies to it. And the problem is, we think it's this event, and then we go to it. Actually, it's a very significant process to be able to get into that. So in the end, why are we doing this? Well, there's a significant benefit to industry. If you can reduce downtime and enhance operations, again, we've heard many a times in this conferences, our purpose as maintainers and asset managers is not to fix equipment. Our purpose is to make the equipment available to produce. So again, if you can improve your outages, shorten downtime, extend run lengths, all these great things, they add benefit. Again, one of the things that we also talked about here is that the modules could be customized to the industry or specific needs, but bottom line, the principles are same. How you necessarily address them to the intensity may vary. And then at the same time, we're aware that, it's a competitive industry. We need to align ourselves with yourselves as industry leaders, but also there is benchmarking out there, competitive standards. So what we want to do is create a competitive training module or a program that really provides, and think about this, for our companies in here in Canada, we're in a global market. And if you can improve one aspect of that, and we've heard this very clearly, asset management, execution, and we could create a better environment for our companies. But at the same time, and as I mentioned before, a standard certification also creates the identification of a profession that we sorely haven't necessarily truly brought up to the level and standard we'd like. Again, as we move forward with this, why are we doing it? What is the benefit to individuals and the industry? You get well-trained people in the pipeline. You can reduce, especially for smaller organizations, you don't necessarily need to develop your own. This could be something that could come off the shelf, and then you can then basically further take it. It's an accreditation program that individuals can get and carry with them, as opposed to saying, I worked for company X, and you're sort of saying, well, did they know what they were doing? Or I learned from this company who no longer exists, or this training program. But in the bottom end, it's really there to improve cost and schedule performance. And what we've shown in industry is that, it's up to 30% there, and it's a great asset. So the survey also fed back that there's a lot of interest from a whole gamut of professionals in our industry in this area, not only just planners, but schedulers, but also the MMP grads who are looking to expand their knowledge and build upon that. And again, the question comes up is, when we ask here, do you feel there's a benefit? Very clearly from our membership, yes. And then what was the best way of going about it? The feedback from the survey said that they thought a certification program similar to what the, what the MMP and the PMP are doing would be beneficial versus other means. Again, where we've gone today is, as Cindy had mentioned, we started this about a year ago. We started formulating an outline with PMAC. We got a steering team together along with the survey. We've outlined a strategic development and basically set up an outline, and we've engaged a steering team. Now we're basically, coming to this meeting and talking about awareness and seeing and getting basically feedback on, is this where we should be moving? And then next after this is we're looking for endorsement to be able to go through it and actually engage in this process. And lastly, basically what we're here is that the certification fills a critical need in the industry where we currently have a gap. It's basically practical and tailored to the education based on the real world, similar to what we've shown here in the MMP certification. Again, we're also looking for more support and also people to help us with this. And again, going out this and asking industry for potential funding or other sources of revenue to be able to develop this. And what we're really looking for is to be able to provide an enhanced industry standard. And in the end, it's making ourselves more efficient at our sites to be able to execute the work. So I've asked these gentlemen here, and again, they're basically cross-representation of industry and what their feedback is and what their insights to. So I'll start with Kurt. You looked at the survey findings I shared with you and the reflections. In your area, would you see this as a benefit to your sector? Yeah, it's right there.
Oh, there we go. maybe some of these sessions are getting recorded. It's interesting for me, in particular, when we talk about my industry, looking around the room, I know there's a couple folks that know me. Primarily, I'm in power and have been for a number of years. That said, I get the opportunity to work in a bunch of different areas: pulp and paper, mining, oil and gas. I've done nuclear, for example. The list goes on. And the short answer, I think, would be yes. I see it across industries. I see it everywhere I go. A lot of what I do is this kind of work, as you guys saw in my presentation there yesterday. So yeah, I think there's a big need, and it's a big gap.
Excellent. Vince? And
yeah, I agree with Kurt. I've also seen a lot of work in the oil and gas industry, and I'm seeing it in mining industry, and I had a brief experience in the forestry industry as well. So I think it's something that is, I think is overdue, if you ask me, actually. Because the question is, when did maintenance actually start? And when did turnaround start? You can't separate both of them.
no.
So it's a big, my answer is a big yes. Yeah, we do need it.
Yeah, and you bring up a very good point is sometimes we use one as the crutch for the other. And unfortunately, that adds to our costs, our workload. And when you get into bigger events, it also affects our safety. And, you know, when you bring in that last person through the gate on a major event, there you're probably your least productive and potentially your biggest rate safety risk. Sean, your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll build on everything that people have said so far. How often is it that things get pushed to the shutdown? You know, we have these conversations. We'll push it to the shutdown. You know, that it's priority, do it faster, but we got to clean up everything we couldn't do during the year. So doing it efficiently and effectively is absolutely paramount, because there is no better value than you can get back for your operation in most industries than shaving off days, hours, weeks, what have you, and bringing things back to cohesive operation.
Yeah, it's interesting when you sit there and talk about shaving, and I work with a lot of clients, and I always talk about entitlement. You know, they say, well, we do it this way, we're different, we're things like, but, you know, they're entitled to be the best. So think about changing a spare tire. How many of us have done that, right? How long does it take? 20 minutes, an hour? But do you realize you're entitled to do that tire in 2 seconds? F1 formula cars do it. Now, are you willing to pay for that? That's the next decision you have to make. But here's the goal. And how do you get there? And how does your industry, you know, basically says, do I want to pay for it? Do I afford it? Can I bring the people in? Those are kind of considerations we have to look at. Sean, I'll start with you on our next question is, what do you feel is the most important training requirement in turnaround, shutdown, and outage management?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. From my perspective, it's a multifaceted piece. You know, we were talking about this earlier. It's a little bit of projects, it's a little bit of maintenance, but really the facilitation aspect of the confidence. You know, understanding the process and doing consistently and coherently makes an enormous difference. Being able to draw the stakeholders together to get them to understand the priorities, which do change. You know, it's subtly different than your typical project in the sense you're not building something. It's not route. We all find things during the shutdown. That's kind of the point. So I would say that being able to adapt and understand that changing landscape and doing the proper things to ensure that the critical work gets done on time, in good fashion.
Yeah, Vince, how about yourself?
To answer that question, I would like to start, you know, what are you looking for while doing a shutdown or an STO? If you go through the processes of the shutdown itself, there are about 6 phases in the shutdown itself. You're talking about the strategy.
Yep.
You're talking about the work list. You know, you're talking about the planning, the schedule. You know, you're looking at the execution, and at the end of the day, you want to sit back and look at what have you executed. You know, did it meet your goal or plan? So if I look at all of these 6, and what comes to my mind is first of all, you want to look at why you're doing it. What's your work list? And then you're looking at your planning and your schedule. These are the critical parts.
Mm-hmm.
These are the critical, you know, phases in your shutdown management that you need to look at. And if you take care of all of this, you know, I think the rest will be pretty easy for you from my experience.
Yeah. No, very true. Kurt, you had an excellent presentation yesterday that talked a lot about what the other two gentlemen have mentioned.
Yeah, it's almost like it's setting me up perfectly. So I think the phrasing I used yesterday was a monopoly board up on the walls. Understand the game you're in, and I think the analogy was soccer versus baseball. So if I preface that by saying you look at, say, like a MMP program or the asset management program, or say project management, you've got all these different games, let's call it, all these ecosystems going on, and shutdowns, outages, turnarounds in general are kind of like its own animal. So it's as if you're playing soccer, but you're also playing baseball. It's if you're walking around with a bat in your hand and a glove, but you're kicking the ball, right? So it's kind of this convoluted mix of different elements from almost different areas. And as Frank's already mentioned, it's trying to refine that or optimize it. And if you can understand the rules of the game, how it works, the pros and cons, the similarities and the differences from other areas, I think it would make for streamlining things and coming out ahead at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think also one thing that you talked a lot about is, and I think Vince, you mean critical path. Now, we grew up in an era, in a time where critical path was the predominant thing we talk about. But unfortunately, the landscape's changed. How many people think about critical mass? How many people are familiar with the term? One or two, okay. So the other way of putting it, how many people got all the folks they needed to actually execute the turnaround? That's a big challenge. We don't have the resources necessarily to do that. So sometimes you actually have to think about, what is my availability of resources? And not only is my critical path the most important thing, but can I get all the rest of the work done too? And sometimes I've seen a lot of clients get trapped by that these days. But the last question I want to ask you, gentlemen, here is, do you think a certification process through PMAC could be done and done successfully to address industry's needs? Kurt, how about we start with you? You got the mic.
That's easy. One word answer, yes. I already alluded to, PMAC Canada-wide, known for maintenance, reliability, asset management. To begin with, all these programs that we have now, I think it's just natural that we would have this program.
Yeah, Vince?
Yeah, I say big yes as well. I'll give an example. Well, not just an example, with something to share from my experience. When we're planning my current organization in mining, we were planning our shutdown or turnaround maintenance. The next thing we are thinking of is, are the resources available? We are competing against other, mining industries that, go to the same market to pick the same resources that we all need.
Yeah.
And the reason why we do that is we don't have enough out there. So I do think that, well-trained personnel in STO is very, very important. What about the certification piece of it? Provides an assurance that these guys know what they're doing, because you don't just want to go out there in the market and pick anyone. You want to pick someone who knows what that person is doing and will deliver value to you at the end of the day. At the end of the day is, what is the goal? When I'm done, if I want to start my plant, will it respond?
Yeah.
Will an equipment function the way I want it to function? So I think it's a big yes.
Yeah, no, excellent point. And the other one to think about is, and again, my background is heavily oil and gas. But one of the things is that, to become more competitive, we stretch run lengths and minimize duration. So the old way of keeping a team that, basically went on muscle memory is gone. You can't retain those folks if your unit's going to be shut down. So now how do you bring them back and, make sure that A, you're bringing them back qualified, or B, that they have what you need to be able to be competitive. Sean, what's your thoughts on that last question?
Well, I'm kind of searching for an answer other than yes. That's a little too simplistic. I do agree, because I heard two questions fundamentally. Does it add value? Absolutely. I don't think there's a person in this room that would disagree that having trained professionals who understand their career path, their job, who can focus, who understand the tasks ahead of them is adding value. But I also heard, can PMAC do it? And I would say resounding yes as well, because the MMP program is a perfect example. It's a well-orchestrated, well-organized, cohesive approach to training professionals in their field. So it's been done, and there's no reason to believe this can't be done successfully as well.
Yeah, very good point. And I think also they're synergistic. The asset management, the maintenance planning, now the outage planning, they're all aligned and basically create a tripod of effort to support our industries. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I'd like to open up the questions to the floor. Anybody have any questions, any insights back there? We have one mic if you can. We're using the mic here because of the recording aspect. It's not because I'm tone deaf. Here, if you could just.
So in your eyes, do you foresee this program being broken down into different modules, like the MMP certification? So like if you're a coordinator for the shutdown, would you take like a modules 1 and 6 that would benefit it? Or is this going to be like a stick, you just take a course and you become certified?
So what the proposal right now is to create a set of modules to basically outline the key aspects of it. You are correct. There is a huge potential here to go, really get into the planning aspect, getting into the scheduling aspect. We want to first walk before we run. So we've laid out with the feedback from the committee is similar to what the MMP is, laying out what the principles are. And then we can talk about, once this is up and running, we can explore those other ones. Hopefully that answers your question.
It did, thank you.
Yeah. Another question up there?
Yeah, so I just want to know about the program. So for me, a turnaround starts when you start ramping down the operations until you're back to full capacity, right? So that's the timeline for shutdowns.
Well, that's the fun part.
Yeah.
The turnaround starts after the last turnaround was finished.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you, of course.
But no, you're right.
No, but for the execution portion,
but in
what about it?
industry,
Yeah.
basically, we want to get out of the siloed approach. Whereas, I'm the maintenance guy, and once the operation gives me the unit, then I give it, and I hand it over in operations. No, turnarounds are feed out to feed in, and how do you optimize the whole aspect? I think you gentlemen will all agree.
Yeah.
It's and how many people have had where you handed a unit over and it didn't necessarily go because the same emphasis and controls weren't necessarily in place? But again, that's what we're using as a standard.
Yeah, because again, like, for example, the tag out lockout strategy is very important for your shutdown. Okay, you want to have the equipment available as soon as possible on that. So all those preparation and all that strategy around that are important.
It's huge.
Safety environment would be covered as well, I guess.
Yes.
So because if any safety events could screw up your shutdowns if something happens and all that, you can have delay. The other thing also, it shut down capital project as well. So they most of the time they are part of the turnaround, the shutdown. So these need to be integrated with the rest of the maintenance that need to be done. And often it's a challenge because you can have co-activities and all that, a lot of things, and who has a priority and all this. So all those capital project aspect also has to be managed.
Yeah, I mean, we would put
Yeah.
a aspect of it. We wouldn't necessarily focus on the full integration project.
Yeah.
Actually, after lunch, I have a presentation on that. So you're
Okay.
welcome to come on that, just sort of kicking in early advertising on the next session. But no, these are the kind of things. So we're looking at the entire aspect. And again, as I was joking around with you, is the turnaround starts at the end of the last turnaround.
Yeah.
What is that post-event and how do you actually prepare? Are you doing an 80-20 scope when you come out of your event to start identifying what are those capital projects in the future? What are those major inspection things that you need to align? And then how can you start integrating? Anyone else for a question? It's right there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank, for that nice presentation, and also the panelists. Thank you for your contributions. So my question is geared towards if this course structure, we cover different models for turnaround. What I mean is, like what Vince mentioned before, there are competing priorities when it comes to job execution. done by the site team, right? So most times when it turn around is coming around, especially for the execution piece, there are hardly any resources available. So those are some of the challenges that they face. So do you propose any cost structure for a kind of potential model that the industry can use? For example, trying to separate the core turnaround team from the day-to-day maintenance team so that they
Those
can
are
have
the
the
kind of
time.
things that we would be looking out here in terms of your introduction, what's your strategy? Not only just in terms of how you're shutting down units, but how do you prepare? Like, again, very many people use gate processes to do your readiness reviews. Most traditionally, everybody does a gate 3 when you close your scope, or sorry, gate 2 when you close your scope, a gate 3 readiness. But there's actually a gate 1 and even a gate 0 to help define all these, right? So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, sure.
Any other ones? I thought
Well, thanks a lot. That's a good presentation, good initiative. My only question would be, a lot of our folks who went through the MMP program are the same folks we tend to use at the back end for a planned outage. Is there going to be some credits issued from an MMP program to a new certification?
we haven't gone that
Okay.
far, but it's something that we would consider. But again, thank you for
Because that should be,
reinforcing
yeah,
that.
that is the motivation for folks to take
Because
that.
there may be some areas here where it's just, the principles of maintenance are still the same. Again, all I tell folks I've worked with is day-to-day maintenance and turnarounds are no difference. The intensity is different.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, because, it is easy for us to do some justification for folks who have done our program to kind of add on, and now they have a better career path within the organization, they can move ahead.
And we've also talked about it, again, until we get our final approval from the PMAC board, are these things there where somebody could take it and say, like you said, I've already an MMP, but I'd like to get the planning section, or I'd like to get this section and things like that. So these are things that we're exploring.
Thank you.
Any other? Sean or Jeremy?
Okay, thanks, Frank. I think you know my opinion on this. I'm a big advocate of it. But the one question I have on this is the curriculum. Like, how are you going to go about? You've got the subjects there, but how are you going to decide what's in there and where you're going to get that information from, or is that still in flight? And
Well, we're still looking at putting that together. That's why we've set up a steering committee. The steering committee, we're basically going to break it down depending on how many people we have. Some on curriculum development, some on, basically looking at funding and association of advertising and looking for interest out there. So this is something that
there's sort of a standard curriculum design process. So the first would be to confirm, like you confirm at that level. And then when you get into each of those, you start from the question, what do people have to be able to do? And you actually put some discipline around asking that question. And then if those are the things they have to do, what do they have to know? So you work backwards from the competence that people need when you're designing a course.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then even asking you all here is like, well, to design 7, we'd need probably 4 or 5 subject matter experts per.
Yeah, and I think this is, and I should have mentioned it in my presentation, but one of the benefits I see of going with PMAC has been involved with curriculum development and understands the process. You don't want to, Frank Engli Incorporated trying to give his opinion and set it up, and maybe I get the 80-20, but the way I go about it or the way others go about it may not necessarily be at the same level of standard as what PMAC has shown. Anyone else?
Just a comment, rather a question now. In the course structure, obviously, it's too early and probably will have, but I would really like to see somewhere portion of it cover for the labor jurisdictions. In a bigger organization, what happens is you got multiple union jurisdictions, and one of the key issues we run into is folks who run and try to execute an outage have no understanding or clarity of the union jurisdiction issues. So they mumble fumble all along, causing significant delays in outage. That's been always we intervene and
Yeah.
kind of resolve that out. But that knowledge should be brought with the students.
Yeah,
that come
and this is an interesting thing, and as I've worked across the world, this is a uniquely Canadian situation we have, and you're right. It's something as a part of this contracting and supply, labor supply and things like that, that we have a different environment to work within. But, you know, you can make it work, but it's a different challenge. I forgot to mention, James here is actually one of our committee members. He's been a participant in some of our meetings. Anybody else for a question? Excellent.
Biggest challenge I find is the scalable piece of it. You go from a day-to-day job all the way up to a major turnaround. The major turnarounds get focused typically, at least in my organization, I'm sure not all, but it's the stuff in between as you're bolting on an additional HS coordinator role or something to a specific like maintenance event. So is the idea to frame up the tools that you can use to manage outages, or is it to like focus more on those big outages with like multiple?
No, what
stakeholders?
our idea here is because the broad range of industries that PMAC covers, you know, again, I've managed the mega turnarounds in the upgraders where I've got 3,000 people on site and, you know, barbarians at the gate every morning. But, you know, and then there's I grew up in an automotive community where changing out your motor line is over a 3-week period, and it's probably, you know, you do every 2 years type of thing. So again, the principles are the same. It's the intensity. So what we're hoping here is outline what you need. The intensity or how many example safety advisors you need will vary. You know, we'll give you ideas, and again, depends on each industry. But the principle here is you should ask the question and answer it versus stumbling into it. Anyone else?
Of course, we had that question and problem with the development of the outage. They're very broad, those, and we have everything from chicken processing to aircraft, like landing gear. And somehow they find they can draw on those principles and apply them in their own context. So we think the same thing could work here.
Yeah. So again, when you look at the feedback we got from the survey, the size of the events and loss production vary, you know, to huge amounts to smaller amounts. But again, they vary by industry. But the real question is, and again, my background, I've been through day-to-day maintenance, you know, major maintenance, then outages or pit stops. And, you know, you need to do the same things, but the amount of effort and the intensity you do it varies. And what you want to do is help a client identify what is the right fit for their organization. I have time for one more question. Otherwise, you're a beautiful audience. Thank you very much. Good night.
I think she's probably waiting for you to pounce on you.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. No, thank you very much. Thanks.